Hi, Martin.
Oh,
Hi there.
hi.
Hey,
Hi, come in.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi, Derek.
Hello, hello. Oh, an interesting point of something we need to pay attention to is our timing, because the daylight savings in the US is starting this weekend and ours is starting in 3 weeks. And I think we set our date and time here to GMT+1, but I don't know how that interacts with daylight savings.
Yeah, I think for last time it was for a couple of weeks a mess
Yep.
until we align again. I think we are complete, right?
Your mic sucks, Michael. You have to switch.
No. I think I just
Now you have the radio voice. Oh, yeah. ASMR.
So
It's Chili Cream FM.
yeah. Okay.
I just checked
Yes,
the calendar reminder, and actually it looks like like next week is shifted by 1 hour in the US, which is
Yes.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. We always, no matter how we do it, right? We will always have a mess. So it's in the US. It's 1 hour earlier or later.
Later.
Does it work for you guys?
Works for me.
Anybody else who would have a problem?
that's odd. I remember last year it was like an hour earlier. It's weird that it's moving up for us. Okay, interesting.
Well, that's gonna be, I think, on the when we go to to the fall, when we switch the timing again. That's actually when it actually goes the other way around, I think.
Yeah, we pinned it last year to the GMT time because before we had it on the UTC, right? That somehow flipped for both. So if it's a problem for anybody, just raise a comment, and then we can look if we just for the I think it's just for a month or so. I would have to look it up, and then it aligns again.
Yeah, no, I think it aligns again, but it might actually mean that the meeting is also earlier or later for us, right? Because it's sort of time daylight savings neutral, the way we've specified it here.
That's interesting. Let's see.
We can also figure it out asynchronously when it may not be worth the time.
Let's figure it out. We just it's every year.
Oh, it shifts
Until
back
the end.
to 11 in April.
Oh,
So it's
God.
for the next 3 weeks. It's an hour later, but then it shifts back to the same time slot.
Okay.
A question. In the main spec group, we have this AI agent that does Node for us.
Yes, that would be actually good. I always thought we should enable it, but I think you have to enable it. Yeah, I'm doing a note,
That would
and
then we don't
because
have.
yeah.
It's-
Just 1 second.
don't have-
Oh, okay, I noted it. I will go back to Benji to configure the meeting, and then we have the AI agent also, which I think is that what I've seen so far is quite good summaries. Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Let me remind you that by being here, we all agree to the GraphQL spec membership agreements and to the GraphQL Foundation Code of Conduct. Today's the primary meeting, and I will be the host today. Let's do a quick round of introduction in the order of the agenda, and that's why I also have the agenda shared here. So.
Oh, I'm Sachin from Apollo.
Yep. Hey,
Um,
everyone's
oh,
Shane from Apollo.
And Martin, also from Apollo.
Derek here. Grandpa.
That's awesome.
Is there something you want to tell us?
Didn't you read the memo?
Camille from Chile, from the EU.
I'm Jeff from Meta.
That's too bad.
Just kidding, from Apollo for the record.
Awesome. Okay, the AI agent that would have summarized that would have struggled, I think. Okay, with that out of the way, let's quickly go over our agenda. We can look at what we discussed a couple of weeks. I think we should do that before I give. I will show just the decision paper we had last week and what was favored by the group. I'm still working on the spec text on that, so I probably need 2 more weeks on that to get it polished, and then we can discuss the actual spec text. There is also some smaller items. There's shareable, which is repeatable in both in the composite schema spec proposal and in Apollo. I don't know why we have it repeatable, so we can discuss that. There is a validation update from Pascal, which will go over a couple of things that are now cleaned up in the validation rules. And then we can also discuss about require, and that's something we also need to specify, that require does not require local fields. So basically from the same subgraph. So we can also talk about that.
Which is surprisingly, it sounds simple.
Does everybody agree with the agenda, or do you want to have some other agenda topics as well on?
So for questions, so since most of us were here on the previous meetings, do we need to do a review of the second of the stuff from the last month, or we are fine with just going to the new stuff? Or should we do it just for recording
the
for
group.
the primary meeting?
I mean, the others are also recorded. Depends on Jeff. Do you want to have a refresher on that, or is it okay
No, I'm
if
good.
we move forward? Okay, and we don't have to go over what was passed. And for everybody who wants to read up on that, we have discussed that actually in the Slack group. Just let me point there, and we have several gists on that, so you can follow a gist trail. And it's also on the issue. Sorry, that is composite schema work group. Exactly this gist, and just as a note, these were the 3 discussion points around the relationship between keys and lookups. And 2 is what we found most appealing because it gives the flexibility but steers people to what we actually want them to do. Okay. With that out of the way, let's actually start with shareable. I think that's actually an easy thing, but I don't know why it is repeatable. So in both the composite schema specification text.
The hands up in chat.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sasha, you want to take it? I think we're both going to say the same thing, so I think you can clarify.
Right. So, yeah, sorry, I can go for it. So shareable basically can be applied to sort of types and fields in this scenario, right? And in the case of types, it specifically is a sort of a shorthand to say the fields that are under this type are shareable, but it only applies to the ones in that particular declaration. So like if you extend the type elsewhere, the shareable does not apply to those fields. And because of that behavior, essentially, that can lead to shareable potentially on multiple types. And that's the reason why it's shareable, why shareable is marked repeatable today.
It
Because-
can end up, but in a given schema, like from a GraphQL standpoint, it will never be in the same spot twice, right?
Right. So it's shareable is something basically that because it's on multiple type declarations because of extend type. Like if you imagine you have some type foo,
Yes.
and you mark supposed to put shareable in this case on type product, right? And later on in the same schema you had extend type product, and you added a field there, and you put shareable there. I think we have it repeatable to allow for that case.
But isn't this not defined in the main spec? Like the merge behavior of type extensions is not specified, right?
No, it's not defined by the core spec. But in this case, where it's the same thing, you could also, like, this is something we have to define how we merge extend types. We don't have that specified yet. But we could say if it's the same, and that's also the algorithm that GraphQL in the query execution uses, right, for skip and include. If it's the same directive with no arguments, then it's essentially the same thing and would be result in one.
Yeah,
Because like if it's repeatable, you expect something to be allowed like this.
And technically, that would be allowed as a side effect of the case we do want to support. Yeah,
that's right.
You mean because of you want to allow this, right, with the extend type?
Well, but it's really about shareable on the type, not on the field.
But again,
But this is about a different spot.
So I see
Because I also know the discussion because this in essence means that it's copied down, right?
Well, yes, but the directive definition applies to the original location. So that's why we need it defined as, like, the directive definition needs to be defined as repeatable to allow you to put it on line 6.
I guess the question is when the repeatability check is done, does it consider over all type extensions or is it just a specific declaration at hand, I guess, is maybe what we're maybe at least that's
this
yeah,
is not...
or another way of putting it is the directive definition defined on top of the SDL or on top of the resulting schema? And I think it's the SDL because they're meant to be sort of processing directives, or at least that's one of their possible uses.
Yeah, but then we don't need to have it like this directive doesn't end up in the public facing schema, right? And the merge behavior of this here, that is what we define. That's not covered on the core spec.
Yeah,
No, and that's fine. We can, like, our merge behavior can be more specific, but if we want this SDL to be valid according to the directive definitions that we specify, shareable needs to be repeatable.
Yeah, but that's not the thing.
Not really. This
This would not be valid.
No, this means really in the same spot on this thing. So it will.
Does it?
No editor will give you an error for that.
Are we sure?
Yeah, I'm
I'm
pretty sure the
pretty
reason we
sure.
did this is because we were getting customers were getting errors, especially when they were doing the move from Fed 1 to Fed 2. Like they were getting errors, and that's we changed the definition.
Because you merged it, or because it was merged?
No, just the way it is right here, like just at the SEL level, without any federation-specific behavior, just looking at the directive definition and the use of that directive in the SEL.
And then
I think it depends on the implementation of the GraphQL spec.
Yeah.
I think some of those are problematic and actually reject this, saying that this is actually applied twice. Some of them may handle it that in a way that they allow for it.
Yeah.
But as Shane mentioned, some folks were complaining that basically their GraphQL schema was invalid and their subgraph couldn't start because of that.
But do we have this still here?
Michael, it's specification, by the way. Type validation of object extensions. Any point 4, any non-repeatable directive provided must not already be applied to the original object type. So it's specification. So we need.
Yeah, but the second case, do we have that really? Like the extent, is that not something from Apollo Federation 1? An issue?
No, so extend in the Federation 1 had a very specific meeting, but that was that changed with Fed 2, I think. So that now we allow add extends, and that sort of was, well, the notion of type extension as a whole goes away in Fed 2.
Well,
there's a-
you can still do this. It's perfectly valid, right? So we're talking about the shareable stuff. You can have a shareable extension fields, but non-shareable core stuff, right? So you may
Right.
still want to define it like that. There are still use cases for it, right? But
Yeah. And it has no specific meaning after the schema is constructed, but from an authoring perspective, it sometimes makes sense to have these extend blocks to sort of to segment specific, to group specific fields, and then apply sort of shared directives to them if that applies.
But is that something that we need in the composite schema spec? Is that something we want to keep? Or is it not needed anymore?
I think we should keep it to maintain backwards compatibility, because if we remove it, then we're going to have errors again with some users.
And if people do write SDL by hand, it's still a useful construct to have, I think.
And if you do it, and if you do overuse it, it's kind of a no-op. Like, does it really matter? Like, if I type shareable 5 times, like, I don't know, like...
No, but we have to handle it in the merge and validation, make sure that it's then removed, basically. It ends up in one thing on what the semantics is if you have two.
Yeah, that actually opens up an interesting question, because our validation rules conceivably could only apply to the constructed schema. Like, we don't necessarily need to handle the schema construction from the SEL, right? We can leave that to the spec, for the core spec.
That is also an aspect I thought about. At the moment, we don't deal in the, so Pascal even removed all the examples that we had with extends, because we haven't defined what we want to do with this kind of thing. Is it up to the implementer of the spec to deal with what this kind of thing means in our specification, how this is merged in? Like, there's a use case if you want to annotate a schema that you don't own, right? You could just provide an additional schema file and use the extend syntax to annotate basically that schema with composite schemas directives. But apart from that, or at this point, we didn't specify anything around this. So
I think we actually said that whatever goes into, so there's a single schema file which is completely merged, which is the input for the source schema validation. I'm not sure if you have specified it like this in the spec text, but this was the idea, is that all pre-processing, so merging extensions into types is part of a pre-processing, which we do not care about. The reason for this is that we don't want to deal with this in the validation and in the composition stage. So it could be that we actually specify that the first step of the composition is merge all extensions together with the types. And then we're good to go. Because the reason why we removed it from the extensions is because it's just confusing. And yeah, let's make it repeatable.
Yeah, but still we have to describe that. I'll add a note why we have this. So the outcome of this discussion, I will add just a note for the reader that we have it repeatable, not because there's a value in actually repeating these, but because of schema editing reasons. And then we have to just kind of deal with it if there are two, because there could technically be two in this place, in this case, then that's reduced to one.
I mean,
I think that
you don't even need to do that though. Like you could just, as long as the logic in the spec says scan the field for a shareable directive, and if it exists, then do these things. Doesn't matter if there's 1 or 10. Like, so in this spec text, like
okay.
obviously implementations could optimize and not have like 10 directives, but like the spec doesn't need to care, right?
It just has to do a check if there's at least one.
There's one thing that we have to keep in mind here. Shareable is a special thing in behavior in federation, as it inherits now to all fields in this extension which are shareable. And from a graphical point of view, from a spec point of view, I don't think that this behavior is correct. Because when you think about it, the shareable, you cannot have a non-repeatable shareable on an extension. And the reason for this is because it's non-repeatable and you extend the type. So this type extension is an extension of product. That means that all the directives that you annotate on these type extensions should have no relation to the type extension. They should actually only relate to the type. Do you know what I mean?
I think I know what you mean, but I'm not sure there's any sort of intended behavior there. Like the sort of in general, the relationship between SDL and the constructed schema is pretty ambiguous, especially when it comes to directives, because they're really sort of processing instructions, and the use of directives at runtime as metadata is very underspecified. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we're going against the intended semantics, but it's also not like according to the spec, because the spec is just
It's specifically for the case that that Derek mentioned, that you can actually create an extension and then define in the extension which fields are shareable.
Yeah.
So if you annotate it in this case, Michael, can you remove it on line 1 quickly, the shareable? In this case, in Apollo, in FAT2, this would mean that name and foo are shareable.
Yeah.
But as you apply the directive to the type, actually, even you apply a directive through.
Well, but applying a directive to a type is just a processing instruction. So it's really up to the preprocessor to decide like what that does. And in our case, we've specified that as basically distributing metadata to the fields in this extension type block. Which is completely custom. I agree, but it doesn't go against the intended meaning, because the directive on the type extension is just a processing instruction that's meant to apply at the SDL level.
Yeah, and I remember our discussion now again, because like it's kind of a scoping that we have here, right?
Yeah.
We scope, this is copied down to this to all the fields on the extension, but not to these ones.
Yeah.
To these ones. Because like shareable on the type is actually not a thing. Like if we wanted to reduce it, really, it could just shareable on fields, and this is more a convenience to get it on the fields of this type system member here.
Yeah.
That's anyway a bit of a stretch, because in your example, Derek, foo would be also defined on the type, right?
Right.
So you would essentially create an extension that says which parts of the type are shareable. You have your base definition with name, description, and foo, and then you make a shareable extension where you group together everything that is shareable from this type. That was the use case that you have described, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be just one type extension.
Yeah, it could
Like
be.
the
Yeah.
it could be merged from multiple sources, and you could have multiple blocks depending on sort of how you authored these.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because there's actually type validation rules in the specification, which would collide with this as well. So we need to see how flexible we want to be with this. Because, for example, there's also the rule, any fields of an object type extension must not be already defined on the original object type. That's another validation rule that object type extensions have.
Yeah.
That means that you cannot redeclare description. Description can only be declared in one place and one place.
You mean this? Yeah, yeah. And in Fusion, we actually allow this. That you can redeclare this just to get a directive on that.
But for the
I mean,
layering behavior that you like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's that especially when we want to allow something, you have a schema already, and you just want to now give semantics with directives on top of that. That's really a practical tool, or can be a practical tool.
And also
Yeah.
just, this all discussion is from like the special quirkiness of the shareable itself, because it's not really like shareable type. It's just a shorthand to apply it on all the fields underneath that,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's type or extension is just there, right? So that's where, like your example of having a description under product without annotation, right? Even though it's technically it shouldn't be legal, right? It's actually the intent is to mark it as shareable, right? So that would make it legal. But yeah, it's kind of quirkiness there.
Yeah. And I remember originally we discussed like possibly this behavior would apply to sort of a class of directives. And I don't know if we have any other directives that have the same sort of distributive behavior in current federation.
We don't currently. It's only shareable.
Okay.
At the moment.
Okay.
We see this used often, the shareable on a type, that you share a whole type. Is this something that is used by customers often?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Let's make the direct.
Steven?
Now, shareable. Is this? Are we talking about the case like we have here where it is not an entity, or like does everything we're saying here apply also to if product was an entity with keys?
Yeah, it applies to both cases. It's independent of the fact.
Yeah, this, in essence, this results in this, right?
Yeah.
Because this is copied down to here. Like if we define it as pre-processing kind of thing, it would basically be we take all the shareables on the type and copy them down to the fields.
Yeah.
For composite schemas, has it been discussed basically going without shareable and going with closer to the Fed 1 approach where an entity is not shareable and a value type is shareable, basically. So if there are no keys on a type, then it's shareable, basically. And then leaving, like if someone if there's a subgraph that doesn't want a value type to be able to be used in a different subgraph, then that's maybe a governance thing that is a kind of a separate layer, and maybe you could have, governance validations. But for the purpose of creating a valid, correct subgraph, do we need shareable?
I think we discussed this through, but it would be interesting to get some input from what the Apollo people think about this.
I think there are a few downsides to sort of the strict value type behavior that we had in Fed 1, because it makes it really hard to evolve types. And also there are valid situations where like multiple subgraphs, either temporarily or just as a matter of fact going forward, are able to serve the same field for the same type, even though it's not itself an entity. As long as it's reachable from an entity, you would still be able to resolve that field from either of the subgraphs that offers it, I would say.
It's also less of a promise than key, right? It's just that you say that this should be the same across different subgraphs, but it's not uniquely identifiable. So otherwise you would have to, if you want to define name on two different subgraphs, it would have to be part of a key to be shareable, right?
Well, I mean, the idea is that there could be an entry point, like something like unique product or something defined in multiple subgraphs that returns the same product. And in that case, you would still be able to resolve it from either subgraph, as long as that unique product field itself is also shareable.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Fed 1, it's basically value types are everything's shareable. It's as if every field, or is this as if the whole value type is marked shareable?
Like an like an atom, like kind of like a scalar,
Yeah,
or considered to be
Yeah.
like a scalar.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that forces you to have the same type definition in all subgraphs that offer that value type. Because as soon as you add a field to only one subgraph, you'd get an error because it's not defined in the other one because of the implicit sharedness. I mean, it's more than shareable. It's actually like forcing you to define all the fields in all the subgraphs for those types.
But what we could do is just generally, as shareable anyway has a bit of a funny definition with the inheritance one scope to the members of the scope. We could extend this, and we could say that shareable follows some inheritance rules, which would open the possibility that in the future, when we talk about, let's say, pragmas, when they come or something like this, that you can actually specify that everything in this file is shareable or something like this. So then you could theoretically have, because I think, Stephen, you have all your value types defined in one single place, and all of the subgraphs use the same definitions of the value types, right? All the teams share these value types, and then you could essentially just say everything in here is shareable. Done.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could just mark the whole file. But really what I'm getting at is just can we simplify the core spec and and basically just reduce the directives that are needed in the core spec basically. Now as far as merging the types, I guess that would be a similar problem to like merging enums, where we would just want to think about the evolvability. But the question would be, do we want to accommodate for having the same just use the term value type that have intentionally different definitions, Or is this only a transient state that we just want to accommodate for schema evolution purposes?
Yeah, I think in FET2 the underlying model is very flexible. Like the distinction between entities and value types isn't really there in terms of like satisfiability, for instance. We're just talking about paths and how you can reach fields. So I don't think we can really define semantics specifically for what you would call a value type, because in the end there is no such a thing. As long as a field is reachable from some kind of entry point, you can define that field on just one subgraph and have other subgraphs like serve the other fields of the same type.
Sachin?
Yeah, there was also some other perspectives for why we went with the sort of shareable route. So another thing we commonly observed is the presence of shareable fields can sometimes increase the number of options that you have to consider when you're planning a query. And so sometimes you would use this as a proxy to tell people, be very explicit about the times when you do allow these kinds of multiple definitions, because then we have to consider those when we go to plan a query. That was also part of it. And there's also more to the, I think Martijn said, around the whole notion of evolvability of a schema. There's a thing that can commonly come up when you want to make a value type become an entity type. And the minute you do that, the minute someone puts a key on it, everyone everywhere then has to suddenly put shareable on their fields. And that's a large lift for a bunch of different teams to come along and essentially have to add shareable to their fields to make that work. Like the process of converting a value type to a entity type becomes much more cumbersome.
Yeah, and I believe that's something that happens often. Like even if something is not like considered an entity by some domain architects in their ivory tower, it could still be an entity in the composite schema because you need this fetching capabilities through lookup or to entity resolvers, that you actually have a value type, and then you say that, you know what, there's a subgraph which actually extends this value type, and then suddenly the value type is no longer a value type, it's then suddenly becomes an entity. So.
Yeah, adding a lookup would then change the semantics. And we would also be forced to sort of reintroduce the notion of entities and value types somehow into the spec and into the notion of, well, into validation and into the notion of satisfiability, because that doesn't really play a role anymore in FET2. So I think it would actually make the spec harder in that sense, especially because we'd sort of have to derive. Like we couldn't rely on key necessarily because that's optional, as we discussed. So you basically have to derive sort of entity status from a lookup then.
I mean, you like the property you had in FET1 was that basically value types were always shareable. Did you have a shareable directive?
Well, I mean, no, we didn't have a shareable directive, and they were, I mean, they were always shareable, but in a very strict sense. Basically, the type definitions needed to be exactly the same in all subgraphs. So it wasn't something that applied per field.
Okay.
Which was very problematic because like how people were upgrading subgraphs, right? Some of stuff. I know we had to do a lot of workarounds around it. Actually, Shane put that in motion in our previous live that's probably still around, but it was very problematic having this sort of constraints.
But the thing that you want, Stephen, is you want them to be kind of auto shareable.
Yeah, it's basically.
I'm just figuring out if a simple pre-processing would already get you out of the woods here, because you could pre-process and just make them all shareable.
Yeah, the pre-processing we can do. I put it in the chat too. Is like you essentially put @shareable on the schema, like on schema block.
Yeah.
Like in
Yeah,
theory, if we don't support that today in the spec in Apollo
Yeah.
Federation, but like if you do that, then that's marking the file as shareable essentially.
Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah, something
no,
like
I mean, the main thing I'm getting at is just, you know, are there ways that we could, you know, reduce the complexity of the core spec, both cognitively, like number of directives and concepts, but also algorithmically, because that's another thing that we've that is the thing that has prevented us from going to Fed 2 is algorithmically it's too complex, and so it's too slow for our usage. And so I'm wondering if some of the restrictions in Fed 2 actually allow the composition query planning to be a bit simpler.
Because the entities are inherently only shareable by the keys and nothing else. Like you cannot define a non-key field in two different subgraphs.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that's kind of a big bomb, but yeah, that's.
I mean, I see the benefit that you get from query planning. You can basically just ditch the whole idea of, is it cheaper to get it from here to here? You just have only one truth. Like, do I have?
Yeah.
Can I resolve this field? Yes, no. There's only one place.
I think when we start discussing satisfiability, it might be interesting to look at possible restrictions when we have a clearer picture of what, like, at least in terms of the spec, algorithmically, that looks like. Because I agree, it would be great if we could find some simplifications or restrictions. I don't think going back to Fed 1 is the solution, but there might be other things that we can add here, or validation rules that sort of make sure that we limit the complexity somehow.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Or a, you know, if we wanted to be able to accommodate you know, shareability on entities, basically, you know, for you know, for use cases where you really want the query planner to kind of do that work for you, you know, maybe that's an optional feature somehow. And so then if you restrict your graph, the query planner can be
yeah,
a different algorithm. But yeah,
it does have other consequences. Like if we don't allow non-key fields on an entity to be shareable, that basically means we're back to the Fed 1 behavior of a value type always needing to have the exact same definition in every subgraph. Because when it's not shareable, like there's only one way of getting there.
Well, I mean, I think it would be like, you know, if there's an additional field somewhere, like, so the two definitions would have to be compatible. And then if a subgraph adds an additional field, it's, I mean, similar to the enum case where like that field, you know, will only be resolvable if the, you know, if that subquery is going to that subgraph. And so it can only ever be null or error from another subgraph. So you're kind of in a, you know, a temporary state where that field is not actually resolvable. You know, it could be like, so we can handle that as like, it's got to be inaccessible first, or it's just, it doesn't exist in the Compose schema until it exists in all of the subgraphs, something, you know, something like that.
Yeah, we would need one of those types of workarounds probably. And I mean, then we are back to the sort of schema evolution behavior that we had with Fed 1, which was fairly problematic for people.
And what we were doing,
but maybe to have a directive at value type or something like this. This would still.
Yeah, what we've done, we've talked our way into Fed 2 again, because what you're saying, Stephen, is think about non-entities, value types, just this type that's non-entity, because this applies to them too. And this part where the problem comes up. If I have a field foo, that's just a value type. I have a foo field one, two, some other new subgraph where there says field 3. And there all the other subgraphs just say 1 and 2, field 1 and 2. Field 3 is now only accessible via if I go to that subgraph B over there.
That's right.
So that means what you're proposing is say, okay, well, that's fine as long as all those things can merge together to some degree and it's not breaking, they're not disagreeing in definitions, et cetera. So all the other things we can do at build time checks, composition. It would be nice if we could say, okay, well, the restrictions are that's allowed, but it has to be like nullable, or we have to like it doesn't appear into the supergraph. Because if we don't allow that, like you run into this problem where like there's technically you could go to subgraph A and someone says, oh, I want field 3, and you only get to subgraph A. You have no way to hop to subgraph B. And so this is unsatisfiable. So this would break our satisfiability rules. So your restrictions would say, okay, well, it must be nullable so that maybe the planner just says it's null, or we automatically mark it as like hidden until all things agree. And that's essentially what we did in Fed 2. It says is we don't do it automatically. We say, hey, developers, you have to do it. So you opt in and you know what you're doing and you use @inaccessible. And that's why inaccessible exists in the first place. And yeah,
so we could still use inaccessible for that case.
Yeah.
That would be, maybe the most explicit way to do it is just, if there's a third, another DGS that wants to add a field, it's got to be marked inaccessible until the field is, reflected everywhere.
Which was also, which was also very problematic in a sense that when you have, as you know, you have probably dozens of subgraphs, right?
Hundreds, yeah.
Yeah. So like if you upgrade one and the other one doesn't follow up with the upgrade immediately, but it publishes their own schema, right? You have to have a source of truth for your shared types of actually upgrading everyone to all the and Shane is laughing because that's what he did. But yeah, it's a lot of workarounds around those things, and that's why I'm not too keen on doing that because it's very, very limiting.
So in the we'll call it the Fed 2 world, or where we don't have the distinction of value types here, does that really reduce coordination between subgraphs like that want to use, but they both want to use product, say? I mean, don't these subgraphs need to be on the same page as far as what a product is? I mean, I guess in theory they could just define two disjoint definitions of product, but
well, I mean, there are cases where we are actually able to jump to another subgraph in Fed 2. For instance, if you have, let's say product is an entity, but we have a, I don't know, some kind of category type or something, which is a value type. And there's just a field category on product, no arguments, and it's shareable. If you enter the graph through a key on product, and you ask for fields 1 and 2 of the category, you can still get field 3 of category from another subgraph that also defines product.
Yeah, so it'd be kind of
one
like a
example.
nested lookup.
Yeah,
in a sense,
it's sort of we were just looking at the valid paths, and as long as a field is marked as shareable, the agreement is that you can go through any path on any subgraph to. So
that's true. Yeah. So it's in Fed 2, it is possible to just only ever provide a portion of a type, even if it's not an entity.
Yeah.
Which could
Whereas
be
without shareable, that's not possible. You have to provide the whole thing or nothing, basically.
Yeah.
from a schema perspective, this is actually quite nice because let's take the case with user. Every user has a profile. Profile is not an entity, so therefore it is a value type. Now you have some metadata that you want to expose on profile. So either what you have to do is you have to make the profile an entity, or you just have to re-expose the user and that metadata to the profile type. So you can actually shape the schema more in how you actually want to have the schema shape instead of forcing people to use lookups where they're not really needed. Like profile would have to have, actually it's difficult because product profile then would have to have an ID. You may not have an ID because it's just some shape that you want to introduce to make your API more correct in terms of schema design. So I do see the case of these shareable value types, because not all value types are reused. Like the product details are most likely just on the product, and this could be defined in two different subgraphs with different fields.
That's true. I mean, I can see that it gives you a bit more flexibility there. Yeah, I don't want to completely derail this discussion. So maybe I do like Martin's idea of maybe revisiting when you look at satisfiability.
Yeah, I think you're because your underlying point is very valid. Like we do need to make sure that we address algorithmic complexity.
But yeah, I can see though there's some value in the flexibility that this affords us. So
well, algorithmic complexity is always fixable. Just have to have more compute.
we just need some quantum computers to do our.
Yeah, OpenAI also just said they couldn't roll out for ChatGPT 4.5 because they don't have enough graphics card, but they get another load next week. So, okay, this was a 10-minute discussion.
Yeah,
that always happens.
Yeah,
no, don't worry. It's good.
We can now talk about shareable by default, and we are talking for another an hour. So,
So I will add a note, explain a bit what we discussed about the scoping, and then we close this case. So I think we cannot run through all the agenda, but maybe the required one is I think we can get into 7 minutes.
Yeah, don't worry. You need to stop sharing, otherwise I cannot share.
Sorry, Pascal.
We should have marked it shareable. Yeah.
Mark it. Okay, so this will be quick. You're sharing. I'm sharing a screen. Can you see this one too?
I can see it.
So just the update for validation is quite something simple. There's this pull request fix validation rules, which fixes a lot of validation rules. It's more to come, but it's just much simpler to do it in one pull request than to always have a pull request for all of the rules. It turned out that's a massive pain to work like this. So we batched them together as we're in the draft state. I believe that's fine. You can read through it, and all the commits are done individually, so this will just be merged as is. There's two structural changes that will go in. Provides invalid fields will be a source schema validation, because it really doesn't need to be in post-merge. It only affects one schema. And there is a change in post-merge, in the post-merge validation rule, which I've just published before. This essentially is not very clear specified. Before it was an algorithm, but the algorithm was completely wrong. So what we do here is we need in requires fields and require invalid fields, we need to verify the field selection map. And instead of having an algorithm which goes in detail through how this is validated, it just referenced the Appendix A, section 6.3, and says that with this declaring type in the context of all these combined schemas, it must be valid based on this definition. This makes it much easier to specify, and also turned out much easier to implement, because Glenn has already implemented this, and I changed this algorithm, and he was like, now he can do the work again. But the outcome was exactly the same thing of his code and the change in the algorithm. Therefore, it probably makes more sense when in these complex cases, when we just reference the specification of the selection field, the field selection map, and just say that it needs to be valid in context of this, because there we have extensive validation. Okay, this now also had something. This triggered a new discussion that we had internally, and the question is that I specifically in this validation rule here, I specifically exclude the current schema from the possible schemas it requires, so that you cannot require fields from yourself. And the interesting discussion that this spawned is, what happens when you have nested types? So, like, if we just say that this is illegal, I can live with this. That makes sense. You cannot require something here which is specified on your graph. But what about this type is shareable, or a field on this type is shareable? And what does this mean for us in you cannot require non-local fields? Because it could be that there is maybe some special product type, which, or it could be something completely different, which defines dimensions too. So now this actually, the validation rule completely falls apart, because details.width is something which is specified in my graph as well. So this is now.
But it's okay, Pascal.
Yeah, but what's the rule that we have? Do we pattern match that from this tree downwards, it needs to be from a different subgraph? It's not
No,
as
it must be available on a different subgraph, and the query planner, I would say, would not pick it from because otherwise you get a lot of complex or even unresolvable.
Would this be valid if
Yes,
it
I would
was
say
defined
it would be.
on a different subgraph?
Does it make sense to require that data there? I don't know, but as long as I can, like from a query planning perspective, as long as I can grab it somewhere else, would be fine.
Right.
I don't know how it's in Apollo Federation today. How do you guys deal with that? The idea is that, yeah, go ahead.
This obviously we don't have require, so it's not applicable, but we have requires, right? So this would come into play basically when you look at subgraph B. If you were to do requires in Apollo Federation, you always have to reference something on the scope of yourself, right? So you have to, if you don't know about some field, you have to define it and mark it as external, to say I want to reference it and like pull it, give it to me somehow. But like you always have to look at, or it's something you define and you mark it as shareable. But like it always has to be like, from where I am in this line here, I'm defining the require or requires directive. Like I can like, I within this subgraph, I'm defining how that relationship looked like, and it must be valid within that subgraph too, because it passes all the other checks.
But it must be shareable or external.
Not that it must be shareable external. It's that you, from the definition of the requires directive, it must exist within that type. And if you don't resolve it, you must mark it as external. And if you do resolve it, then you can reference it. And then it can or cannot be shareable. It could or could not be shareable. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's only if it's shareable if it's also defined in another subgraph. So it's not required to be shareable.
Because if it only existed on B, then we would create pretty.
I'm just asking, like, what would happen if I require this here in a polar federation. And this is not external, it's just on this subgraph and resolvable. What would happen in this case? Would it just work?
And it doesn't exist on A.
This would fail composition error because if we look ignoring product, we would just have there would be a composition error trying to merge product details types.
Yeah, let's forget about this. Let's forget about this. That's the only thing that exists.
Then this this is fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But the difference is that we don't pass that data in through an argument. We have the implicit underscore entities. And in this case, the assumption would be that this subgraph would always fetch the product fields, even if it wasn't supplied
But
in underscore entities.
How do you pass it in through the underscore entities field?
No, we don't pass it in the case when it's local to the subgraph.
Because
The
you
assumption
say
is
it's already there.
it's already there. There's that's just how sort of fetching behavior is defined in.
But that's basically in the reference resolver. You have to then deal with the fact that it is not automatically supplied, which could be surprising.
That's very surprising.
Well, it's another consequence of underscore entities being untyped and reference resolvers being underspecified, custom. So with require and the switch to explicit variables, I think that might be an opportunity to be more explicit about the expected behavior here or disallow it.
Because the way I think from a query planning perspective is we would this should be an error.
Yeah, I think so too, because you don't want to be forced to go back and forth just to yeah,
because you get a regress fragmentation then and sorry, Derek, go ahead.
It is an error in federation. There's a validation says that requires missing external. So fields have to be marked external or.
So that makes
we just assume sense. That we just assume right here. We just assume if it's local, you just go get it yourself. You don't need to define it in the schema as a different requirement.
Which is a much better behavior, I would say, because you're telling the user, okay, what you built here is inefficient, or it makes no sense. You have it anyway. Just grab it. And that's also how I would see it for us, right? That we if it's only here, then we error out. You can have it here, and it doesn't have to be external, but it also has to live somewhere else.
So in that case, we would say that. Sorry, we're already 5 minutes late, but just to get this correct now, that would mean that we produce an error because it's only on this subgraph. This width, right? And then in this case, it wouldn't be an error because it's on the other subgraph as well. I mean, it's just on the other subgraph. And what happens in this case when we have here shareable and here shareable? And would that be also an error?
It also seems weird to me that we're sort of the implicit behavior here is that we're getting it from another subgraph, even though we could supply it ourselves.
Yeah, we could always error it out, though.
Same thing. So essentially, for the validation rule, this means that we actually have to do a diff between the current subgraph and all the other subgraphs.
I think the simplest rule, but maybe that's too restrictive, would force you to not have details defined here on schema B. Would sort of disallow that.
Then that's exactly the value object discussion that we had before.
Yeah. So that's too simplistic. You're right.
Stephen, it's coming back.
Yeah, I think specifically composition in Apollo at least disallows leaf fields to be non-external. Is maybe the story today. So
yep.
Evaluation
So
I see
leaf,
can't be.
yeah. So leaf fields can't be defined in the same subgraph. Would that then be the equivalent of that rule?
Yeah, I think they're specifically like when I say leaf fields, I mean like basically the last field in the requires. The leaf fields of the requires specifically, but yeah.
Yeah. So that would mean that both width and height here would be illegal, right? It doesn't matter whether it's shareable or not. Like as long as a field is defined locally in schema B, you're not allowed to reference it in a require.
Makes sense.
If it's not external, right? Because it could be like something provides.
Yeah, external has a different. Well, now this gets really, really nice.
No, don't let's go. Let's not go there.
Let's
Pascal.
save that for
Yeah,
next week.
for another day. Okay, that's good. That's good. We can update the rules for that.
No provides.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's pick it up anyway. Then everybody can have some thoughts on that, because there are a couple of edge cases here.
Yeah.
And then we can discuss, pick that up next week.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Then see you next time, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Tip.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.